Nehemiah chapter 7. Now that the wall had been rebuilt, I had the doors set up, and the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites were put in charge of them. Over Jerusalem I placed Hananiah, my brother, and Hananiah, the commander of the citadel, who was more trustworthy and God-fearing than most. I said to them, the gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot, and while the sun is still shining, they shall shut and bar the doors. Appoint as sentinels the inhabitants of Jerusalem, some at their watch posts and others in front of their own houses. Census of the province. Now the city was quite wide and spacious, but its population was small, and none of the houses had been rebuilt. When my God had inspired me to gather together the nobles, the magistrates, and the people, and to examine their family records, I came upon the family list of those who had returned in the earliest period. There I found the following written. These are the inhabitants of the province who returned from the captivity of the exiles, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away, and who came back to Jerusalem and Judah to their own cities. They returned with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, Azariah, Ramiah, Nehemiah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mishpereth, Bigvai, Nehum, and Bana. The census of the people of Israel, descendants of Parosh, 2,172. Descendants of Shephatiah, 372. Descendants of Era, 652. Descendants of Pahath Moab, who were descendants of Jeshua and Joab, 2,818. Descendants of Elam, 1,254. Descendants of Zatu, 845. Descendants of Zekai, 760. Descendants of Benau, 648. Descendants of Bebai, 628. Descendants of Asgab, 2,322. Descendants of Adonikim, 667. Descendants of Bigvai, 2,067. Descendants of Aden, 655. Descendants of Adar, who were descendants of Hezekiah, 98. Descendants of Hashem, 328. Descendants of Bezai, 324. Descendants of Harith, 112. Descendants of Gibeah, 95. People of Bethlehem of Netophah, 188. People of Anathoth, 128. People of Beth Asmaveth, 42. People of Kiriath Jearim, Japhira, and Beeroth, 743. People of Ramah and Jeba, 621. People of Michmas, 122. People of Bethel and Ar, 123. People of Nebo, 52. Descendants of the other Elam, 1,254. Descendants of Haram, 320. Descendants of Jericho, 345. Descendants of Lod, Hadid, and Ono, 721. Descendants of Sinai, 3,930. The priests, descendants of Jediah of the house of Jeshua, 973. Descendants of Emer, 1,052. Descendants of Pashur, 1,247. Descendants of Haram, 1,017. The Levites, descendants of Jeshua, Kadmiel, of the descendants of Hodaviah, 74. The singers, descendants of Asaph, 148. The gatekeepers, descendants of Shalom, descendants of Ater, descendants of Talmon, descendants of Akub, descendants of Hatita, descendants of Shobai, 138. The temple servants, descendants of Zihah, descendants of Hasupha, descendants of Tabaoth, descendants of Kiros, descendants of Siah, descendants of Padon, descendants of Lebanon, descendants of Hagabah, descendants of Shalmai, descendants of Hanim, descendants of Gidel, descendants of Gehar, descendants of Riah, descendants of Relan, descendants of Nekoda, descendants of Gazam, descendants of Uzzah, descendants of Paseah, descendants of Besai, descendants of Meunites, descendants of the Nephusites, descendants of Bakbuk, descendants of Hakupha, descendants of Harhur, descendants of Basilisk, descendants of Mahila, descendants of Harsha, descendants of Barkos, descendants of Sisera, descendants of Tema, descendants of Neziah, descendants of Hatifa, descendants of Solomon's servants, descendants of Sotai, descendants of Sophereth, descendants of Perida, descendants of Jala, descendants of Darkon, descendants of Gidel, descendants of Shephatiah, descendants of Hatul, descendants of Pocheret, Hazabaim, descendants of Ammon. The total of the temple servants and the descendants of Solomon's servants was 392. The following returned from Tel Milah, Tel Hasha, Chira, Adon, and Emer were unable to prove that their ancestral houses and their descent were Israelite. Descendants of Delaiah, descendants of Tobiah, descendants of Nekoda, 642. Also the priests, descendants of Hodiah, descendants of Hakos, descendants of Barzillai. He had married one of the daughters of Barzillai, the Gileadite, and was named after him. These men searched their family records, but their names could not be found written there. Hence, they were disqualified from the priesthood, and the governor ordered them not to partake of the most holy foods until there should be a priest to consult the Urim and Thummim. The entire assembly taken together came to 42,360, not counting their male and female servants, who were 7,337. They also had 200 male and female singers. The horses were 736, the mules 245, the camels 435, the donkeys 6,720. Certain of the heads of ancestral houses contributed to the temple service. The governor put into the treasury 1,000 drachmas of gold, 50 basins, 30 vestments for the priests, and 500 minas of silver. Some of the heads of ancestral houses contributed to the treasury for the temple service, 20,000 drachmas of gold and 2,200 minas of silver. The contributions of the rest of the people amounted to 20,000 drachmas of gold, 2,000 minas of silver, and 67 vestments for priests. The priests, Levites, the gatekeepers, the singles, the temple servants, and all Israel took up residence in their cities.